At 70, the name Denzel Washington feels less like a celebrity and more like a compass pointing toward grit, grace, and the stubborn duty to do what's right when no one is watching. For more than 4 decades, he didn't just collect roles. He carved epitaphs for quiet courage, marching through the fire of glory, wearing the thunder of training day, and inhabiting the wounded silences of fences. He made conviction cinematic. He made restraint roar. But the emblem of discipline was not forged under spotlights. It was hammered in a small New York town called Mount Vernon, in a house where prayers were plentiful and hugs were scarce, where a mother with salon-scarred hands kept the lights on, and a Pentecostal preacher father taught order more than affection. When the marriage split, a 4-year-old boy was sent away to the Oakland Military Academy. The boots were loud, the mornings colder, but the lesson was permanent. Discipline could be love in disguise. Years later, at Fordham University, hunger, literal and otherwise, met a stage, and a life tilted toward destiny. He would come to measure success in quieter currencies: vows kept, mentors heeding, doors held open for those coming behind. A young actor named Chadwick Boseman would one day stand on a stage and say there was no Black Panther without Denzel. The crowd applauded. Denzel lowered his head. Legacy, he understood, is loudest when you don't speak. This is not a tale of trophies. It is a pilgrimage through broken homes, narrow dorm beds, 16-hour shoots, funerals that came too soon, and a marriage that refused to yield. It is the story of a man who kept choosing principle over convenience, devotion over applause, purpose over comfort. And at 70, the question is not whether he still stands tall. The question is what it costs to stand this straight, and what ghosts still walk beside him when the set goes dark. But the darkest chapter has not yet been told. Denzel Washington did not simply arrive in Hollywood. He entered like a quiet front of weather, no thunder at first, just pressure you could feel in your bones. The cameras loved the face, sure, but what made him inevitable was the interior weight. A man who treats every line like a vow and every silence like a courtroom where the soul testifies. Across 4 decades, he has played saints and sinners and somehow made both feel like confessions. Glory gave us defiance with a tear that did more work than an entire monologue. Malcolm X gave us velocity, the sense that history can sprint. Philadelphia taught us tenderness with the volume turned down. And Training Day proved he could set morality on fire and still make you search the ashes for a human heart. Yet the legend is not built from trophies, though there are many, but from a philosophy he repeats, like liturgy, discipline, faith, responsibility. He speaks to graduates about falling forward, about the sacredness of hard things. He warns that ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship, and you believe him because the words sound lived in, not borrowed. Off-screen, he is stubbornly analog. Church before chatter, family before fame. The light finds him. He doesn't chase it. He learned that posture early. In Mount Vernon, a mother with salon-strong hands met every obstacle with order, and a preacher father drew straight lines where the world drew spirals. When the house split, the boy learned 2 lessons at once: how absence echoes and how structure can save a life. Military school turned rebellion into ritual boots, bed corners, straight spines. College sharpened the rest. At Fordham, he flirted with one path before surrendering to the one that chose him. A YMCA talent night cracked open the door, and destiny rushed in like air into a starved room. He trained, he read, he listened. He did the unglamorous repetitions that separate passion from craft. Hollywood eventually noticed, but he refused the easy ladder. There were roles that paid well but carved the wrong grooves in the soul. He stepped away. There were scripts heavy with stereotype. He set them down. There were days he was asked for the glitter and offered the truth instead. Somewhere between auditions and arrival, he decided that celebrity would not be the point character would. The result is a filmography that plays like a long argument for dignity, even when the character is running from it. The culture needed that steadiness. In an industry allergic to memory, he insisted on legacy mentoring, funding, opening gates for those coming after. The quiet checks, the recommendations, the simple, spine-straightening example of showing up prepared. Actors talk about him like a North Star, not because he is perfect, but because he is consistent. Even the way he carries fame, low flame, slow burn, feels like a corrective in a time of spectacle. And still, for all his certainties, the man is not made of marble. There are private griefs and public rumors, friendships that ended at funerals, and a marriage that survived the weather. There is the admitted fear, he jokes about heights, the humility to start again with each roll, the ritual of prayer before the clapperboard snaps. He has walked through rooms where everyone is performing confidence and chosen to perform conscience instead. That is rarer than it sounds. A little-known detail whispers the larger pattern. He keeps handwritten notes, scripture, scene beats, fragments of wisdom folded like talismans, reminders that purpose is a daily decision. Another, he prefers the word work to art, as if to say that excellence is not a mood but a muscle. The audience sees magnetism, he sees maintenance. So when we ask, at 70, what's truly happening to Denzel Washington, we are not chasing scandal, we're tracing cost. What does it take to live this long at altitude without losing oxygen? What did discipline protect and what did it demand? Behind the applause, there were rooms of quiet reckoning. Behind the characters, a ledger of choices. Behind the legend, a boy from Mount Vernon still making his bed square. The lights rise. The frame tightens. The story steps back to the beginning, where the ache began and the spine was made. Before the Oscars, before the headlines, before the name Denzel Washington became shorthand for moral gravity, there was a boy standing in a narrow hallway in Mount Vernon, New York, barefoot, waiting for his parents' voices to stop echoing. The smell of hair dye drifted from his mother's beauty salon, the hum of hair dryers mixing with gospel radio. Out front, women traded laughter, recipes, and quiet heartbreak. In the back, Lennis Washington worked with a rhythm that never faltered. Clip, comb, curl, pray. She was the sort of mother who believed exhaustion was proof of love. His father, Reverend Denzel Hayes Washington Sr., moved through the world with an entirely different tempo. A Pentecostal minister and a city worker, he carried his faith like armor. Earnest, rigid, absolute. The home they shared was small but full of rules. No backtalk, no slouching, grace before meals, church every Sunday. The word love was rarely spoken aloud. It was expected to be understood. And though his father's sermons thundered about salvation, they didn't leave much room for softness. Denzel later described the household as city meets country, his mother all drive and independence, his father all structure and silence. Opposites attract, he said once, and then they separate. Is Louvre repelled to many goddess. When the separation came, it landed like an earthquake disguised as a whisper. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a sudden quiet that felt endless. The boy was 14. He would later tell interviewers that the divorce wasn't what broke him. It was the silence afterward. His father moved out, taking his sermons with him, and the house that once trembled with hymnals fell still. We never really connected, he admitted years later. He worked all the time and preached on weekends. I didn't cry when he died, not because I didn't love him, but because we never got close enough for that. It was a confession more tender than bitter, the kind that comes from someone still learning how to name absence. In the months after his father left, Denzel drifted. Mount Vernon was a tough neighborhood in the late 1960s, full of restless boys rehearsing trouble. He watched friends slide from mischief into police reports, from schoolyards into cell blocks. The guys I hung with did 40 years combined, he said. They went one way, I went another. What he didn't say but implied was that the line between those two fates was his mother. Lennis saw the risk and acted before it became regret. One morning, without ceremony, she told him to pack a bag. She was sending him to the Oakland Military Academy in New Windsor, New York. To him, it felt like exile. To her, it was rescue. The academy's dormitories were cold, the boots stiff, the mornings merciless. Orders barked, uniforms pressed, punishment swift. He hated it until, slowly, he didn't. Somewhere between the drills and the silence, between loneliness and structure, a new rhythm took hold. He began to understand that discipline wasn't cruelty. It was protection in a world that punished chaos. Discipline became my first language, he would later say. The one my mother taught me without words. That's where the steel was forged, the spine that would one day carry entire films. Military school turned defiance into focus, transformed confusion into intent. He began to run track, to study, to stay still long enough to listen. Nights in the barracks were spent thinking about his mother, her rough hands, her tired smile, the way she looked at him the day she left him there, eyes wet, voice dry. I think my mother saved my life, he said decades later. That was love wearing a soldier's uniform. When he returned home, Mount Vernon seemed smaller, the old crowd more dangerous, the noise less tempting. But something had changed in him. He was quieter now, slower to anger, more deliberate. The same boy who once mouthed off now measured his words like currency. His mother noticed. So did the neighbors. The barber's son was growing into a man who looked like he already carried a secret. That secret was purpose, still unnamed but already burning. High school ended, and with it came the uncertainty of what came next. College wasn't a given, money was thin. But Lennis, proud and pragmatic, insisted he go. She wanted more for her son than survival. So Denzel enrolled at Fordham University in the Bronx, a world away from Mount Vernon's rhythm, though only 20 miles south. The city was bigger, colder, faster. He struggled to find footing at first. His grades were uneven, his confidence shaky. He switched majors, lost interest, and nearly dropped out. He was adrift again, caught between expectation and exhaustion. And then, fate quiet, precise intervened. A summer job at a YMCA camp in Lakeville, New York became a turning point. He was supposed to teach kids to swim. Instead, one night, he was asked to fill in at a camp talent show. He reluctantly stepped on stage, delivered a quick improv sketch, and something extraordinary happened. The laughter wasn't mocking, it was electric. A woman in the crowd leaned forward and said, "You were born to act." That sentence changed everything. He returned to Fordham different possessed. He switched his major to drama, enrolled in acting classes, and found the discipline of the stage familiar to the drills of military life. You hit your mark, you respected the line, you showed up ready. He graduated in 1977, lean but determined, and won a scholarship to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. That's where craft hardened into calling. The world still didn't know his name, but the foundations were already set. The reverend's son who learned silence, the soldier who learned order, the janitor who learned humility, and the young actor who learned to transmute all three into art. The pain of that childhood, its separations, its absences, its quiet forms of love would echo through every role he ever played. You can hear it in the pauses, the looks, the stillness between words. He turned childhood ache into adult authenticity. The boy who once feared becoming his father had become something else entirely. A man shaped by both of them, the faith of one, the fire of the other. From that paradox, a legend was born. When Denzel Washington arrived in San Francisco in the late 1970s, he was a man divided between hunger and humility. The American Conservatory Theater was demanding, competitive, and merciless toward dreamers who mistook ambition for ability. He lived in a small rented room that smelled faintly of mildew and dust, the kind of place where the floorboards remembered every step. Nights were long, the wind from the Pacific crawling through the cracks like a ghost. He rehearsed lines under a flickering bulb, wrapping himself in an old coat when the cold crept in. Dinner was often a slice of bread, sometimes just tap water. He had no safety net, only faith. Each morning he'd walk to class, rehearsing Shakespeare aloud, his breath fogging in the air. He didn't yet know he was building the cadence that would one day command stages and screens. He only knew that words had to be earned. He studied body, breath, stillness. He learned that acting wasn't pretending, it was remembering truth under pressure. That was his mother's lesson, translated into art. After a year, broke but unbroken, he returned to New York City. The skyline greeted him like an old friend who didn't quite remember his name. He carried a single suitcase, a worn-out Bible, and a promise to himself. I will not waste this struggle. He took every audition that came his way. Most ended in rejection doors that closed softly, kindly, endlessly. He worked odd jobs to survive. He swept floors, delivered packages, carried boxes, poured coffee. Every no was fuel, he later said. Faith kept me knocking. It was during this season of anonymity that he discovered something crucial: patience. Fame might have been a lottery, but discipline was a choice he could make every morning. In 1977, that perseverance cracked open the first door. He landed a small role in a television movie called Wilma. It was a modest biopic about Olympic sprinter Wilma Rudolph, but for Denzel, it was everything. It was his first time in front of a camera, his first paycheck, and though he didn't know it yet, the set where he'd meet the woman who would change his life, Pauletta Pearson, a classically trained pianist and actress. They met quietly, without pretense, somewhere between takes. He tried to charm her. She saw through him immediately. I wasn't impressed, she later laughed. But destiny, as it tends to, was patient. They crossed paths again, months later, at a stage play in Atlanta. She arrived late, found her seat, and it happened to be beside him. That night, a conversation turned into connection. "That's when it started," he said. She'd later joke, "I paid for our first date, and I've been paying ever since." The laughter between them became its own form of faith. By 1982, Denzel's persistence was rewarded with his first major break, a role in the NBC medical drama Street Elsewhere. The series ran for 6 seasons, and his portrayal of Dr. Philip Chandler, sharp, layered, emotionally grounded, made him a familiar face in American living rooms. For many actors, television is a stepping stone. For Denzel, it was a forge. "It taught me rhythm," he said. "TV trains you to find truth fast, to stay real even when the clock isn't kind." Even then, he wasn't chasing celebrity. Between shoots, he spent evenings in small theaters across Manhattan, returning to the stage as if to recharge his soul. Theater reminded him who he was before the cameras arrived. A craftsman, not a commodity. Then came 1984's A Soldier's Story, a film adaptation of Charles Fuller's Pulitzer-winning play. Denzel's portrayal of Private Peterson was electric-controlled fury beneath calm. Critics noticed. Hollywood noticed. The performance earned him his first major critical acclaim and marked him as a new kind of leading man, one who carried both intelligence and danger in the same glance. But for every door that opened, others slammed. Roles offered to him often came with stereotypes attached, characters written to decorate, not define. He turned many down, a dangerous choice for an actor still climbing. "Some scripts paid well," he later admitted, "but I couldn't sleep if I said yes." One of those roles, in 1986, could have catapulted him into mainstream fame, but the story twisted race into spectacle. Denzel sought counsel from Sidney Poitier, his quiet mentor and moral compass. Poitier told him, "The first few films you do will tell the world who you are. Choose wisely." He listened. He walked away from the easy paycheck and waited for the right kind of work. 2 years later, that choice paid off, with Cry Freedom 1987, directed by Richard Attenborough, where Denzel played South African activist Steve Biko. The performance earned him his first Oscar nomination, and suddenly the world could no longer look away. The boy from Mount Vernon had become a voice for truth on screen. "I'm not here to entertain injustice," he said at the time. "I'm here to expose it." That statement wasn't PR, it was conviction. The camera became his pulpit. The next years would test both his art and his endurance. He still lived simply, still called his mother every Sunday, still refused the gossip circuit. Fame arrived, but he met it with restraint. When asked why he never moved to Los Angeles early on, he said, "I didn't want the lights to get brighter than my soul." By 1989, Denzel Washington had earned his first Academy Award for Glory. The film, about the first all-black regiment in the Civil War, gave him the platform and respect that would carry him through the next decade. But it wasn't triumph he remembered most, it was the tears. That single tear down his cheek, director Edward Zwick recalled, wasn't planned. It just happened. It was the truest moment on set. That tear wasn't just acting. It was memory, the ache of a boy who'd once stood in a broken home, the discipline of a soldier's son, the faith of a mother who refused to give up, all of it poured through a single frame. By the end of the 1,980 seconds, Denzel Washington wasn't merely an actor on the rise. He was a principal, embodied a living argument for integrity in a business built on illusion. And even then, he sensed the warning that would define the rest of his journey. Every spotlight casts a shadow. By the dawn of the 1,990 seconds, Denzel Washington had become something Hollywood couldn't quite categorize. He wasn't the charming rebel or the tortured genius. He was both an actor whose quiet fire burned hotter than the noise around him. Every performance felt like a sermon disguised as cinema, and every role seemed to rewrite what black excellence could look like on screen. He wasn't playing heroes. He was redefining them. The world began to see it clearly in 1989's glory. That single tear rolling down his cheek, unscripted, raw, devastating, wasn't just a cinematic moment. It was revelation. For that performance, he won his first Academy Award, Best Supporting Actor, and with it came something more dangerous than fame: expectation. Directors began to call, studios began to whisper, but Denzel, as always, stayed still. He knew that the next choices would decide whether he became a star or a symbol. Then came Malcolm X, 1992, the role that redefined him and in many ways redefined American cinema. It wasn't a portrayal, it was possession. Under Spike Lee's direction, Denzel inhabited Malcolm with such intensity that people who had known the man in real life left the theater in tears. His preparation was legendary months of study, fasting, prayer, total immersion. The cadence, the conviction, the controlled rage, it was all there. Critics hailed it as one of the greatest performances in modern film history. Yet, when the Oscar went elsewhere, the disappointment barely flickered across his face. "I don't measure success in statues," he said quietly. "I measure it in impact." Between Cry Freedom and Malcolm X, Denzel became something rare. A leading man whose power came not from seduction or swagger, but from presence. You could feel him before he spoke. His stillness was as commanding as other men's shouts, and his range astonishing. In Philadelphia 1993, opposite Tom Hanks, he played Joe Miller, a lawyer whose prejudice dissolves into empathy. The film demanded nuance, not grandstanding, and Denzel delivered it like a whisper that could cut glass. "It's not about what he says," one critic wrote. "It's about what he withholds." He became the kind of actor other actors studied. He was technical but intuitive, powerful yet restrained. There was rhythm in the way he spoke, tension in the pauses. He could express more in a glance than most could in a paragraph. In The Pelican Brief and Crimson Tide, he proved he could anchor thrillers with moral weight. In The Hurricane 1999, he shattered hearts as the wrongly imprisoned boxer Reuben Hurricane Carter, a man who refused to let hatred define him. When the lights dimmed at the premiere, Carter himself stood and wept. "He gave me my life back," he said. By the end of the decade, Denzel Washington was more than a star, he was a standard. His name had become a synonym for quality, his face for integrity, but that pedestal came with a price. "Every victory costs something," he told an interviewer. "You pay in time, in peace and sleep." The pressure of being flawless, of carrying representation and morality on his shoulders, was immense. He once said, half-jokingly, "If I play a villain, people ask, why? If I play a hero, they say, of course." Either way, they expect perfection. The truth was simpler and harder. He wanted freedom, not applause. Then came Training Day, 2001, the risk that became redemption. Detective Alonzo Harris was the antithesis of everything audiences thought Denzel stood for. Corrupt, charismatic, terrifyingly human. He didn't just play evil, he seduced you into it. The performance was volcanic, each line dripping with venom and truth. When the Academy finally handed him the Oscar for Best Actor, it felt like both a victory and a release. "King Kong ain't got nothing on me," became the battle cry of a man finally free to explore every side of himself. "I wasn't trying to shock anyone," he said later. "I was just telling the truth from a different corner." That same year, he stepped behind the camera to direct Anwone Fisher, the story of a young man's redemption through forgiveness. It was a quieter success, but a deeply personal one. Denzel wasn't content to be just the face of Hollywood excellence. He wanted to shape what stories got told, to give voice to the silenced. In a business obsessed with spectacle, he chased substance. In the years that followed, his filmography became a sermon on endurance. Man on Fire, 2004, showcased righteous fury wrapped in tenderness. Inside Man, 2006, proved intellect could be action's equal. American Gangster, 2007, opposite Russell Crowe, blurred the moral lines entirely. Through it all, he stayed private, grounded, almost monastic. No scandals, no headlines, just the work. Behind the camera flash, though, there was fatigue. 16-hour days, scripts that demanded everything, the unrelenting churn of expectation. He was the man who made intensity look effortless, but effort always has a cost. Sometimes on set, he'd sit alone in his trailer, long after wrap, staring into the mirror. "You start wondering," he once said, "why you began, and if the world still needs what you're giving." It wasn't burnout. It was the exhaustion that comes from carrying meaning for too long. And yet, his faith kept him upright. Church on Sundays, prayer before every role. He tithed, he taught, he stayed connected to the people who knew him before fame. In interviews, he often quoted scripture, "To whom much is given, much is required." For Denzel, that wasn't a platitude, it was a contract. His discipline, the same one his mother forged and his father preached, became both shield and burden. By the late 2000s, he stood as one of the last truly unshakable figures in Hollywood, a moral heavyweight in an age of glass reputations. When the industry bent toward chaos, he didn't. When it worshipped novelty, he doubled down on legacy. Younger actors flocked to him for advice, and he gave it freely. Fail big, he told them. Fall forward. It wasn't about winning, it was about momentum. In the Book of Eli, 2010, he played a prophet wandering through a ruined world, protecting the last Bible on earth. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. It was as if the role was written for him, the preacher's son who found salvation in performance, the man who carried faith through every storm. By then, he wasn't chasing scripts anymore. He was chasing meaning. The spotlight had long crowned him. But Denzel Washington never wore fame like jewelry. He wore it like armor necessary, heavy, but never defining. The world saw a perfect man. What they didn't see were the scars, the physical exhaustion, the loneliness, the quiet griefs he carried behind the stillness. At the peak of fame, he didn't reach for more. He reached inward for balance, for peace, for God. And while the world kept applauding, he was already walking towards something else. A quieter stage, a deeper test, a reckoning only he could face. Every legend, no matter how righteous the rise, carries a shadow. For Denzel Washington, the world saw the crown but never the weight pressing against his temples. Fame had lifted him to a place where applause became constant, and strangely, where silence became rare. The noise of adoration is seductive, but it is also corrosive. The man who once valued stillness began to feel its absence like oxygen running thin. He never spiraled into scandal, never gave the tabloids a headline worth printing, but tragedy has more subtle disguises than downfall. His pain was private, woven into his discipline. It lived in the exhaustion, in the toll of being everyone's pillar. You pay for greatness, he once said. You pay for it in peace. There ever once sat in some mong downering. The first tremor came not from failure, but from grief. In 1991, while filming Malcolm X, Denzel received the call that his father had passed away. There was no warning, no last words, no reconciliation. He went back to set, put on Malcolm's suit, and kept working. The cameras rolled while inside him. A son was mourning the man who taught him duty, but not affection. I didn't cry at his funeral, he later admitted. Not because I didn't care, because I didn't know how. Every sermon, every stare, every fiery line he delivered on screen afterward carried that silence. The preacher's son, who once resented absence, now spoke through it. He learned that grief doesn't always scream. It often whispers, keep moving. But loss rarely travels alone. It invites reflection, and reflection invites ghosts. As his career climbed, Denzel's own spiritual questions deepened. Faith had always been his compass, yet success can blur direction. He began to ask whether his purpose still matched his platform. What good is it, he mused in an interview, if the world knows your name but God doesn't know your voice? The late 1990s and early 2000s brought what some called his second golden age, the hurricane, Training Day, Man on Fire. But behind those fiery roles were sleepless nights and aching bones. He was no longer the unshakable machine Hollywood believed him to be. On the set of Training Day, the intensity drained him. 16-hour shoots, weeks without rest, a schedule that blurred days into sermons of repetition. Every role cost something, he told a friend. Sometimes you wonder if the price is your peace. Even so, the true tragedies of Denzel's life didn't play out under the lights. They unfolded in the quiet where love, loss, and regret met. In 2012, he lost someone who had once embodied both grace and chaos, Whitney Houston. Their bond had begun years earlier on the set of The Preacher's Wife, 1996. It was a friendship born of faith and forged in mutual understanding, two artists trying to stay pure in an industry built to devour purity. He called her a light, and she called him steady. They were kindred spirits, not lovers but believers. When the news broke that Whitney had died at just 48, Denzel froze. I didn't believe it, he said later. You never think the angels will leave early. At her funeral, he sat in the back pew, head bowed, hands clasped, saying nothing. The choir sang Amazing Grace, and for the second time in his life, he felt the hollow echo of words too late to be spoken. She gave everything, he whispered, and it cost her everything. And it doesn't stop. For weeks afterward, he avoided interviews. The loss wasn't just about Whitney, it was about every soul he couldn't save, every silence he hadn't broken. He had always been the one who helped others stand. Now, alone in his home, he wondered whether he'd ever really known how to reach those who were falling. That doubt deepened in 2020, when another loss came, this one even closer to the heart. Chadwick Boseman, the young actor Denzel had unknowingly sponsored years before, passed away at just 43. Denzel had paid Boseman's tuition to a summer program at Oxford, quietly, anonymously, through Felicia Rashad. He never met the young man until years later, when Boseman had already become a star. On stage at the AFI tribute, Boseman publicly thanked him. "There is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington." Denzel had smiled that night, humbled, unaware that behind the gratitude was a secret war. Boseman was dying of cancer, and he had told no one. When the news broke, Denzel was stunned. "He never said a word," he murmured. He carried it all in silence. The words hit him like scripture. The same silence his father had lived. The same silence Whitney had drowned in. The same silence he himself had worn as armor. Grief once again found him, but this time it brought revelation. He realized that faith isn't only about endurance, it's also about expression. "Say the good things," he told a group of students later that year. "Don't wait for the eulogy." Still, tragedy doesn't always end with enlightenment. It lingers in the body. In 2013, Denzel underwent a heart procedure, a quiet, routine surgery that most would call maintenance. But for him, it was a reminder of fragility. Under sterile lights, listening to the beeping rhythm of his own pulse, he finally heard what his mother had once told him. "Take care of your heart, it's where God speaks." When he woke, he didn't think about awards or scripts. He thought about forgiveness, unfinished conversations, the people who still needed his voice. Later he told a friend, "Even iron needs mending." That line would become a quiet refrain in his later years. Pain became teacher again. When his mother Lennis passed, it reopened the deepest wound of all, the one that began when she sent him away at 14. "Losing her felt like losing his compass. She was the strongest person I ever knew," he said softly. When she left, the world went quiet again. He began waking early, reading her favorite psalms at sunrise, whispering, "You were right, Ma. God did have me." To the world, it looked like serenity. To Denzel, it was survival. He started speaking more openly, about mortality, about surrender. "Aging," he told a crowd, "isn't losing strength. It's gaining peace." His fear of heights, something he once hid, became a metaphor he shared freely. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he laughed. "It's doing it anyway before you think too much." But beneath the humor, there was the truth. He had outlived many of his peers, mentors, and friends. He had watched icons fall to excess, collapse under fame, burn out under pressure. His tragedy wasn't that he fell, it was that he survived and had to carry the memory of those who didn't. Today, he carries that weight quietly. The preacher's son, the soldier's student, the artist who turned discipline into devotion. He now walks more slowly, speaks more softly, listens longer. There are scars under the stillness, ghosts behind the grace. But every loss has become a verse in the gospel of his life. Denzel Washington never had a public downfall. His tragedy was subtler, more profound. He learned that endurance isn't about resisting pain, it's about letting it refine you. Every heartbreak, every funeral, every unspoken goodbye became proof that faith, even when cracked, still holds. And so, the man who once defined power on screen now defines peace off it. But the story isn't finished, because behind that peace lies a question he still wrestles with in the dark. When the applause fades and the world goes quiet, who comforts the man who once comforted us all? By the time Denzel Washington turned 70, he had long outlived the life expectancy of fame. Most stars burn out. He slowed down. Not in relevance, but in rhythm. The man who once sprinted across sets now walked laps around his garden at sunrise, whispering prayers under his breath. In the stillness of Beverly Hills, he found something he'd chased for decades, peace that didn't depend on applause. His mornings began the same way they always had, scripture before coffee. The same King James Bible, pages worn thin, verses underlined in blue ink. Beside him, Pauletta, his wife of more than 40 years, played soft gospel on the piano. The house smelled of roasted beans and old wood, the air thick with memory. He liked it that way. He didn't need noise to feel alive anymore, only gratitude. He often said, "I used to measure success in scripts. Now I measure it in heartbeats." It wasn't just a metaphor. After his heart surgery in 2013, every breath felt like a small resurrection. He'd wake early, touch the faint scar on his chest, and smile. "That's not pain," he once told a friend. "That's proof." Gone were the endless shooting days, the frantic press tours, the hunger to outdo himself. He still worked, but differently, deliberately. When he returned for The Equalizer 3, it wasn't to prove he could still fight. It was to prove he could still feel. Every punch, every pause, carried the weight of a man who had learned that true power is control, not chaos. He told young co-stars, "Violence isn't interesting. What's interesting is purpose." His body bore reminders of time's quiet toll, the ache in the knees from old stunts, the stiffness in his back after long flights. But he met age the way he met everything, with grace and humor. "If there's a scene on a balcony," he joked, "let's shoot it first before I remember I don't like heights." Denzel no longer measured himself by roles or reviews. The Hollywood machine that once demanded his every minute now received him on his own terms. He turned down more offers than he accepted. "You can't take it with you," he said, "but you can pass it on." So, he passed it on: mentorship, scholarships, quiet acts of generosity. He still visited Boys and Girls Clubs of America, the same program that once gave him structure as a kid. He didn't arrive with cameras, only advice. Discipline is freedom. He taught by example. On set, he was first to arrive, last to complain. Younger actors said working with him felt like being in church, an education in both craft and character. He'd tell them, "Ease is the enemy. Fall forward." The words echoed like scripture because they came from the same place: faith forged by experience. At home, his life moved to gentler music. Family dinners, backyard barbecues, jazz on the radio. His children, John David, Katya, Malcolm, and Olivia, were grown now, each walking their own creative paths. Sometimes, the grandchildren visited, filling the yard with laughter that sounded like redemption. On Sunday evenings, the Washingtons prayed together, giving thanks for ordinary things: food, health, laughter, another sunrise. Denzel often said that he was not preparing for retirement, he was preparing for reflection. "When you stop learning, you start dying," he told a graduating class at Fordham. So he reads more, studies scripture, writes in longhand, keeps journals full of small revelations. "God's been good," he'll write, "but he's also been precise." His life now runs on the quiet mechanics of gratitude. He no longer hides his vulnerability. He speaks softly about fear, mortality, forgiveness. "I'm not afraid to die," he once told a reporter, "but I'm not in a hurry either." For a man who once lived in the eye of the storm, stillness has become his revolution. Fame didn't destroy him, it tempered him. Every heartbreak, every loss, every scar turned to wisdom. The boy who once needed saving became the man who now saves through his example. And when the night falls over Los Angeles, the city glowing like a stage below his hilltop home, Denzel sometimes steps outside. The air is cool, the palms sway, the world hums. He looks up at the stars, hands in his pockets, and murmurs, "Still here, still grateful." It's not a prayer for more. It's a thank you for enough. There are actors who entertain, and then there are those who alter the cultural temperature of an era. Denzel Washington did both and then went further. He didn't simply inhabit characters. He elevated the conversation about what character itself means. Through 4 decades, he became less a performer than a moral architecture within American cinema, a reminder that excellence without integrity is just noise. His legacy isn't defined by the awards on his shelf, though there are many, or the billions his films have earned worldwide. It's defined by the precision of his choices, by the stubborn decency that has threaded through every performance. He once said, "Don't aspire to make a living, aspire to make a difference." That sentence became a kind of compass for a generation of young artists lost in the fog of fame. The impact of his work ripples beyond the screen. To the Black community, he became what Sidney Poitier had been to him: a mirror and a map. Poitier opened the door. Denzel rebuilt the frame. He refused caricature. He demanded depth. His characters, soldiers, fathers, detectives, revolutionaries, were men shaped by conscience rather than cliché. In doing so, he changed what Hollywood thought an African-American leading man could be. Not exceptional despite his color, but essential because of his humanity. Every role he chose carried an undercurrent of truth. In Malcolm X, it was dignity and defiance. In The Hurricane, it was justice without vengeance. In Fences, it was masculinity torn between pride and regret. In Training Day, it was corruption wrapped around charisma. Even when he played broken men, he made sure the cracks let light through. He didn't chase trends. He set them. The rise of actors like Chadwick Boseman, Michael B. Jordan, John David Washington, and others reflects the pathways he cleared. Chadwick himself said it best: "There is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington." That wasn't flattery, it was lineage. Denzel's quiet generosity had literally financed Boseman's education, but symbolically, it financed possibility. In an industry addicted to spectacle, Denzel's restraint became revolutionary. His silences spoke in full sentences. His eyes carried sermons. Directors marveled at how he could make a single breath feel like punctuation. Younger actors began to imitate his stillness, mistaking it for style. What they missed was its source: a lifetime of discipline and faith. Off-screen, his philanthropy flowed with the same quiet precision. Millions donated to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, to his alma mater Fordham University, to the Fisher House Foundation supporting wounded veterans, and to the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. But he never spoke about these acts. "If you're going to give," he said, "give quietly. Let the good speak for itself." That humility became part of his mythos. In an age when celebrity thrives on exposure, Denzel cultivated mystery. He gave the public enough truth to respect him, but never enough to consume him. When asked why he stayed off social media, he smiled and said, "Because peace is underrated." BS. Culturally, his influence stretches far beyond the movies. He's become a kind of elder statesman for artistry with conscience. Universities quote him in commencement speeches. Churches play his interviews as modern-day parables. Even in memes and viral clips, his wisdom travels simple, grounded, indestructible. Critics often say that Denzel Washington's screen presence feels biblical, but that comparison misses the quieter truth. His legacy is not just spiritual, it's practical. He proved that you can survive Hollywood without surrendering your soul. That consistency is his revolution. His face has become cinematic shorthand for integrity. When audiences see him, they expect truth. That expectation is both burden and blessing, but it means something extraordinary. In an age where everything is performative, he made authenticity the performance. And now, as younger generations discover his films, streaming them in dorm rooms, quoting his speeches, studying his craft, they aren't just watching movies. They're learning discipline disguised as drama. They're learning what happens when talent bows to principle, not the other way around. In the grand narrative of cinema, Denzel Washington's story reads like a parable of endurance. From a preacher's son in Mount Vernon to a global symbol of strength and grace, his journey is both deeply personal and profoundly universal. He turned faith into fuel, grief into gravitas, silence into language. Time will polish the details, as it always does, but one truth will remain unblurred. Denzel Washington changed the measure of greatness, not by how loud he roared, but by how deeply he stood. If there's a single thread that runs through the story of Denzel Washington, it's not luck or fame, it's discipline. In a world where Hollywood often rewards chaos, he chose structure. While others chased applause, he chased alignment. And maybe that's what separates icons from idols. Idols demand worship, icons demand reflection. From this channel's perspective, Denzel Washington represents the rare fusion of faith and ferocity. A man who brought reverence into an industry built on illusion. You can see it in every role, every pause, every gaze that carries more truth than dialogue. He's not perfect, he's human, and that's precisely why his story matters. When you strip away the awards and sound bites, what remains is a man constantly wrestling with himself, with pride, loss, faith, and forgiveness. His tragedy isn't scandal, it's solitude. The solitude of a man who has spent his life giving everything to others while keeping so much of himself unspoken. We've seen his strength on screen, but his quiet heartbreaks off it tell a deeper story. He has outlasted trends, outshined gossip, and outworked everyone. Yet even now, his legacy is not measured in net worth or opening weekends. It's measured in the moral gravity he brings to every frame he occupies. His presence reminds audiences that conviction can be cinematic, that empathy can be powerful, that masculinity can be both fierce and gentle. But Denzel's story also raises uncomfortable questions, questions that echo through the corridors of fame. What does a man of faith owe to a world that profits from sin? What happens when a figure of strength becomes everyone's anchor but forgets to rest his own soul? And how many silences must one carry before they begin to sound like prayers? Hollywood often loves to praise its legends, but rarely does it understand them. Denzel Washington has spent his career doing something more radical than rebellion. He stayed decent. In a culture that mistakes cynicism for wisdom, his optimism feels like defiance. He never allowed bitterness to rot into belief. Instead, he built a fortress of faith, word by word, prayer by prayer. To this channel, his legacy is not merely cinematic, it's spiritual. It's a reminder that greatness doesn't have to be loud, and that the most powerful revolutions often happen quietly, in rooms without cameras, between a man and his conscience. He is proof that you can stand in the center of an empire and still belong to something greater than yourself. And yet, it's that same quietness that gives his life its haunting edge. The way he speaks of his late mother with reverence, the way he whispers about Whitney Houston and Chadwick Boseman with unfinished tenderness, the way he prays for the strength to keep carrying the names of those who fell before him. There is peace in his eyes now, but also memory. Perhaps that's what makes Denzel Washington's story so profoundly human. It isn't the absence of tragedy, it's his ability to turn it into testimony. He's lived long enough to see pain lose its power and faith regain its place. The question we leave to you, the viewer, the believer, the dreamer, is this. In an age that rewards the loudest voices, what does it mean to live with quiet conviction? What does it mean to be good in a world that confuses goodness with weakness? Because in Denzel Washington's life, we find not just the rise of a legend, but the endurance of a man who never stopped choosing light, even when surrounded by shadows. There's something sacred about watching a man grow old without growing bitter. Denzel Washington at 70 is not a monument. He's a melody, steady, unhurried, familiar, but still resonant with notes you haven't quite heard before. He has lived through decades of noise and still managed to preserve silence. That alone feels miraculous. The cameras may fade, the roles may slow, but his voice measured, deliberate, unwavering, remains a compass for anyone who's ever wondered how to survive the world without losing themselves. In him, we see the strange beauty of endurance, not just surviving fame, but staying true inside it. Sometimes, late at night, he steps out into his garden. The Los Angeles skyline glimmers below, a sea of light mimicking stars. The air hums with crickets, faint jazz drifts through the open window, and he breathes slow, steady, grateful. He thinks of his mother, of his father's sermons, of Whitney's laughter, of Chadwick's gratitude, of Pauletta's piano chords echoing through the house. The sound of life, fragile and miraculous. He closes his eyes and smiles. He no longer runs toward the light, he walks beside it. The boy from Mount Vernon has outlived his doubts, outlasted his storms, and learned that faith is not a finish line, it's a rhythm. Every sunrise is a reminder. Every breath is a quiet prayer. There's a line he once said that lingers like scripture. Fall down 7 times, get up 8. But what he never said, what we've learned watching him, is that sometimes getting up means standing still, breathing, forgiving, remembering. Denzel Washington's life is more than a filmography. It's a sermon about grace. It's the story of a man who refused to let pain make him smaller, who believed that success without service is failure, and who understood that the real reward of faith isn't applause, it's peace. So when the final curtain eventually falls, the lights dim, and the credits roll, the legend will remain. Not in marble, not in myth, but in the quiet strength of those he's inspired, the actors he lifted, the lives he touched, the generations who learned from his example that power means nothing without purpose. And as the night deepens over Hollywood, one can almost imagine his voice soft, resolute, and timeless, whispering into the wind. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now,